For this one, we're going to take a look at how to create a chocolate bar mockup template in Photoshop. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to get ourselves 3 more copies of this image right here. You can do this by pressing Ctrl or Command and J 3 times. And we're going to rename all of these to BG for the first one. You want to rename the next one to Shape, the next one to Shadows, and the very last one to Highlights. Starting on the shape first, we're going to double left click on here, and you want to get yourself a color overlay. You can set it to any color that you want. You just want to press OK, and we're just going to right click and convert this into a smart object. Now, the reason for this is because we're going to use this layer as a reference for the shape of the product. Now, speaking of the product, we're going to focus on the shadows first, and we're going to hide the highlights, because for the shadows, we need to invert this color to the dark colors. We can do this by going to Adjustments, and you want to get yourself the levels. If you don't see your Adjustments tab open, you can always bring this back by going to Window and get yourself the adjustments right here. Now, once you're in here, once again, get yourself the levels. And what we're going to do is we're going to shift the colors over to this point right here. So you want to have a look at the graph and see where the bumps are. And this is where those opposite colors will be. Now, when it comes to levels, you have the black point, you have the midpoint, and also the white point. So what we want to do for this one is we want to drag the middle point all the way to the right until we reach this dark zone. You can see the colors are starting to shift. So around 0.14 is really good. We also need to change the output level. This one is responsible for the dark colors and the white colors. So we just want to turn down the white colors all the way until you see it like this. So I would say 129 looks really good. Now, once you're happy with the changes, we can close this down. And what we want to do is we want to hold Shift, left click on the shadow layer, and you want to right click and convert this into a smart object. This will then allow us to change the mode or the effect, and we can set this one to multiply. We also want to click on the highlights. And for this one, you want to set this one to screen. Now, at the moment, you won't notice any changes because we don't have any artwork. So what we're going to do is we're going to hide the highlights once again and the shadows. What we're going to do now is we're going to bring in the artwork, and we're going to select the shape. And in order to apply the artwork, we're going to create a smart object. We can get ourselves the shape tool. You want to left click, drag this out, and get yourself a shape that is roughly the same size as your product. We can close this down. And in order to apply the artwork onto this shape, we need to once again right click and convert this into a smart object. Now, the reason for this is because we can now double left click on here to open this up, and you can apply your artwork inside of this canvas right here. So for me, I created a fake chocolate brand called VerticDesigns. I'm just going to simply drag and drop this into this canvas. And by holding Alt, we can drag this out and maintain the aspect ratio. So roughly, I would say around here looks good. You can double left click to apply. And then once you're happy with the changes, you can close this down. Make sure that you click on yes. And there we go. We now have our artwork onto this shape right here. So we're just going to call this one artwork. Now, once you've got yourself the artwork, we're going to lower the opacity down to 50% by pressing 5 on our keyboard. And we can see exactly what it's going to look like. So by pressing Ctrl or Command and T, we can change the scale. We can also hold Shift and rotate this to around -15. We just want to crop this down, but make sure that you still have the edges included. Once you're happy with the changes, you can double left click to apply and then press 0 on your keyboard to bring it back to 100%. Now, at the moment, we need to crop this down into the shape, and we can do this by holding Alt or Option key. And then if you hover in between the shape and the artwork, you can left click to clip this and copy this shape right here. Now, at the moment, we have the simple artwork applied onto the product, but we also need to bring back the shadows and the highlights. Starting on the shadows first, you can see this is really harsh, and we need to control how dark these shadows are going to be. We can once again go back onto the adjustments and get ourselves the levels. Drag this one slightly over to the right to around, let's say 19. We're going to bring this one to the left to around 1.21. Now for this one, we want to bring out the white point all the way to the left to shift the midpoints until it's visible. So you can see we still have the dark areas, but we also have the main branding visible. Now for this one, we're going to minimize the properties, and you want to set this one to 80% for the opacity. And as you can see, we now have the dark areas visible on the edges, and it isn't too harsh. However, at the moment, it's a little bit dark and dull, so we need to bring back the highlights by unhiding this layer. And then once again, the same steps, going back onto the adjustments, getting ourselves the levels. For this one, we're just going to focus purely on the bright areas, or the white areas in this case. And we can do this by dragging the first one over to the right until the midpoint is close enough to this area on the graph. Move the midpoint to the left slightly. We're going to leave the last one on 255. And in order to apply this onto the product, we're also going to lower the opacity of this one to around, let's say, 68. Now, this varies depending on your branding or your packaging, so you may need to adjust it a few times until you're happy with the changes. Now, finally, the very last thing that I like to do is I also like to go onto the artwork and lower this down to around, let's say, 90%. This just makes it blend a little bit better with the original packaging and just makes it look more realistic. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That is how you create a chocolate bar mockup template in Photoshop.